Thank you. Yeah, debating the motion on regretting the dominant prioritization of star power over talent in choosing main characters in Asian entertainment industry. Let's now call on the Prime Minister to start the debate, please.
Hi, am I visible and audible?
Yes, you are both visible and audible.
All right. Up your eyes, just your voice. The ability to rile together an audience can be seen seemingly a good thing. It is a public image, it is your looks, it is your aura that draws people in. But the problem with this is that it's the easiest thing to fudge up, the easiest thing to allow nepotism to spread, and the easiest thing to allow cultural differences and beauty standards to continue to perpetuate. How often have you seen a movie star just completely look absolutely different from the Asian characteristics that you know they uphold? To be completely pale, to be completely white, with your nose so tiny that you can barely see it. Like, these are the images that prioritize star power and have continuously and allowed these standards to perpetuate, not just to harm their fans and the people who observe them, but the artists themselves. There are two things I want to talk about in this motion, two arguments that I think are very important about those artists and about those fans. But the first thing I want to do is set up what this looks like. The dominant port of prioritization means that this is a deal breaker in most often
Hi.
cases. If people are of equal same as the hi,
Yeah, I think you were lagging for a few seconds. Can the other debaters confirm? Um, yeah, I think it's either we just turn off our cameras so that you can speak like consistently, clearly. Would that be fine, Cara? I think it would be also fine if you restart your
uh
speech. You were
yeah,
lagging
sure.
earlier.
I think my internet does that sometimes, but it doesn't like do it like continuously. So I think that was just a blip for now.
Okay. Yeah, I think you can restart your speech then.
Okay. Um I'll start. Star power is what perpetuates the kinds of beauty standards that we see today in Asian culture, where people are as white as can be, where their noses are thin and their bodies are thinner. Those kinds of images do not only just hurt the fans involved, but hurts the people who are in those caricatures themselves. Those artists who are forced to make themselves thinner, those people who are forced to make themselves look like that. The problem with this motion is I'll firstly explain what the dominant prioritization looks like. This looks like a complete deal breaker for these individuals. So it looks like the idea that if people are of equal talent, it is their star power, the ability to fit in within beauty standards that will break the deal, that will allow them to be the main character, the main vocalist in that K-pop group, the main character, the main actor in that drama, just the whole soul focus. And that doesn't just mean you get granted opportunities. That means you get granted a career, a stable career where the industry invests in you a lot, gives you a proper salary, gives you all these kinds of things and security down the line. And that only gets funneled to the very select few individuals who can fit within those characteristics. That not only harms them, but the rest of the people around them. Because this is controlled by casting directors, by CEOs, by directors of those individual companies. And we would rather prefer that it is followed, that you base this decision on more meritocratic standards based on talent rather than a very arbitrary star power that is subjective to people. There are two arguments that I want to run. Firstly, that our artists will be better treated by the industry, and secondly, why fans will be more involved. I want to talk about the first argument. So, just to contextualize, in Asian culture, there is still a lot of harsh stigmas on your body, on how you look like, on the kinds of beauty standards that there are. There are still whitening soaps for you to use the very regularly that you can see in convenience stores. It is the greatest pressure that exists in society, which currently will only be furthered by this kind of industry. And lots of people who want to be artists are glorified in the idea that they can just go on The Voice and suddenly they will amass a greatest amount of star power, that they'll have so many fans to follow them. This is just a false lie, because what is star power actually based on? The first is that kind of appearance, and this is the initial judgment for people. So maybe you have very cultural differences when it comes to how you look like. Maybe they, on opposition, they'll argue that these ethnic differences are what the deal breakers are because those ethnic differences are what makes it beautiful. But that's obviously not the case. The beauty standards that we see today and the artists that we see today are not people who are out of the norm, but within the norm perfectly, who are absolutely thin, who are absolutely white and pale and reflect that idea of Asian beauty standards. It is unchangeable that you cannot change your body to look like that. Therefore, very difficult for artists to pursue it. But secondly, when it comes to media attention, what companies do is very sneakily is they don't just measure how much fans you have, but the amount of fans that can pay for the kinds of things that they want. If your fans have money, if your fans can buy merch, so you can't just go on an award show and then get a hashtag trending and you get your local community or local village to campaign around you because your local village cannot sell out stadiums. So instead, what they base it off of and what it's easier to fudge is things like followings on social media, things like your ability to be on TV show ads because it shows that you have the capability to reach those connections in the first place, to reach those platforms in the first place. And that means that it is easier to fall into those same traps of people who are at the very top, allowing their sons and daughters to be able to be involved in the industry, allowing those cycles of nepotism because they can put their sons and daughters on those kinds of TV show ads. They can make sure that their sons and daughters have fans that have the money to be able to pay off this merch. The impacts on this on artists as a whole or people who are pursuing these kinds of careers are twofold. The first is pressure by the industry to change. And this is so terrible because it is so difficult for you to be able to handle these kinds of things when it comes to weight loss. It is so difficult to push your body to be what it is not. But secondly, it is the perverse company incentives to favor things like nepotism, to favor things like people at the very top and elite, never allowing anyone to really compete for these positions to begin with. I want to talk about the comparative. Why is talent fairer on these artists? Or at least in the ways that companies pressure people to be talented, why is it a fairer way? There are two reasons. One, it is more accessible to people to be talented than it is to be popular because you can dance well, you can focus on singing well versus force your body to be what it is not, versus force your skin to get 10 shades lighter when it cannot possibly do that. So yes, you still have to work hard, but these standards are easier to reach because you can dance, you can do things like sing at the end of the day, and that means artists don't have to push themselves to the brink of completely changing their identities. The second is that it is just much more accountable for companies because if they have to then market along the idea that they are a talented group of individuals, not just people who are pursuing star power, it means that you cannot fudge it up. You cannot just like for example put your son and daughter in there as the company CEO if they don't have the talent in the first place. If they like obviously on government side, it is easier to do things like put them on shows, put them on ads, because that is where you can make the metrics skewed in their favor, versus it's so much harder to do that on our side. The importance is you give these artists dignity when it comes to their work, and you only provide that on government. Before I move on, I'll take a point.
Cruel beauty standards and nepotism don't go away when you eliminate star power. If anything, star power is the only reason directors can afford to hire morena beauties or people who don't fit the standard because they have an independent fan base.
So the people who are fans of Morena Beauties, the whole point is, I just said that it doesn't matter how many fans they have in their local village. They need to be able to amass connections and platforms because that is what CEOs are looking for. If companies want you as their sole billboard platforms, and those companies, those connections you do not garner by just being popular in your community. That is why it is easy to fudge up a following by being able to be involved in nepotism. So sure, it exists on both sides, but it persists to worse extents versus you can be easier held accountable when the standard is talent. I want to talk about the second argument, why fans are more involved, and there are two important reasons why they're involved. The first reason is that you get more representation when it comes to talent. And here's where I want to explain why vulnerable ethnic minorities can also be able to participate. Because one, the appreciation for cultural differences exists better when it comes to singing and dancing because you are automatically better at several different kinds of movements when it comes to singing or moving your hips or things like that because your different cultural differences when it comes to dancing apply there better versus cultural standards when it comes to beauty are so unchanging where people cannot just automatically accept that you are darker skinned. Secondly, it is just easier to teach you dancing because your culture, your ethnic community also has those kinds of dances. Therefore, it's a generational passed down thing versus having to market yourself to a large base platform. The second reason why you get more fans involved is just genuine talent. It's just more attractive, more virality for people if you can copy these hard dances through challenges rather than just having someone on a TikTok live for hours. At the end of this, it is important for artists to have dignity and people to want to watch them in the first place.
We like to thank the Prime Minister for their speech. We don't like to call on leader of opposition.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible and visible.
Okay. I'll take POIs through chat, or you can turn on your camera. Uh, yeah. Okay. I'll start my speech in three, two. Hello, Love, Goodbye was the highest gross Filipino film. And without the star power of Catherine and Alden Richards, no one would have ever invested enough in this film to reach the highest levels of gross tickets bought. Anak, which was a socially critical film about the experience of OFWs, would have never gotten the light of day without Vilma Santos. The Asian entertainment industry is expensive, and it needs the security of star power for it to get itself on its feet. Some setup. One, I'd like to note that it is a debate about leads, main characters, and the ones who are mainly the face of these movies, i.e., we are okay with actors who are not well known being placed into secondary roles, secondary leads, etc. This looks like people like Faye Wong in Cantonese cinema, who was often the second lead before her career took off, or people like Donnie De Leon in Golden Triangle, who was able to win a Golden Globe regardless of their position as the secondary antagonist. Secondly, that people have star power for a reason, right? They can't just say these people are just completely talentless, they're just pretty faces. These people have experience, they have immense acting skills that are just undeniable, which is why they got a cult of personality in the first place. It's their ability to appeal to people with emotions that otherwise would have never been attainable by a simple person who never had the talent or charisma to appeal to a broad majority of people. But secondly, they've developed a strong cult of personality and fan base. That meant that most people that did accept them were at the very least guaranteed of a broad number of people opting in to their content. Two responses. One, beauty standards, nepotism, and the disgusting overwork is the same on either side. We still have things like Western entertainment. We still have misogyny and the patriarchy. We still have beauty product corporations that perpetuate these standards. These are presumably the same on either side. Secondly, we actually flip this idea. What is talent? You can't describe talent quantifiably. We'd explain to you the question of what is better acting, what is better dancing, what is better talent, that are still determined by the same people that they explain to be corrupt. The same people that they explain are likely to push you beyond your normal human means and force you to do things like diet until starvation. It's very easy to twist this, and it's very easy metrics for the fan base of support in comparison on our side that just meant it's less likely for you to have all these things just be bad and more exploitative. First argument, why is this the only way to safeguard the entertainment industry? Before that, Theo Asher.
So the problem here is that you can't just symmetrize everything and say, well, the Asian entertainment industry is going to be racist. What's important is that a lot of the reasons why people gravitate to certain individuals are because of those racial lines in the first place. You exacerbate that in your comparative.
Cool. Let's answer that question then. Why is this the only way to safeguard the entertainment industry? And I want to note this response to their POI because it explains why box office success is the most important. The comparative that they had to contend with is that failure is the death of the career, that people are reluctant to hire you at the point of which you are even remotely related to this project. And it's only when studios have big budgets they can afford to take on novel ideas, on indie films, on different actors from diverse backgrounds that would have never been supported under their comparative because of no investments. First argument, why is star power justified? Three mechanisms. One, it's that the only way to get committed investment and funding is through star power, i.e., perhaps movies on their side still get paid. We explain that they're just on net worse movies. They don't have enough equipment or high investment in these things, enough CGI, or enough advertising to be able to ensure that these things get to a mass level of people. Secondly, this means that movies in their world are just set up for failure. And under our comparative, there's two things. One, that star power at the very least ensures that movies succeed to investors, and therefore there's more incentive for them to just straight up put money into these movies. But secondly, that star power enables creative freedom, i.e., socially controversial films like Private Benjamin with Vice Ganda was only able to be invested in because of the idea that because Vice Ganda starred in it, you would have gotten a fan base supporting these socially controversial movies in the first place. What this means, you get en masse broad representation for even diverse amounts of people in comparison to what they explain. Secondly, that the studio spends more on advertising to get views under their comparative, right? If you don't have a star power, it's hard for you just to get people to buy into tickets, right? It's millions of funds wasted from set design and film budget to things like ads, where even if you believe that the film was diverse, you believe that the film was important, it's just so much more expensive and hard for you to actually get these things out there. But thirdly, that star power more easily attracts talent. It's filmographers, it's editors, it's producers who don't have to exponentially be paid with higher amounts and waste more money or just collapse the project altogether. Because these people want to work with stars. They want it for their career reputation and just even things like good job exits after they finish this project. Weighings on this are clear. Firstly, if you believe in the value of film, what's important is that the film industry survives. It doesn't matter if one small artist is able to get representation if the box office itself flops and their career never gets off. But secondly, even if it's small time actors that are important, we explain why studios can only free up investment space into indie or smaller firms when they have the guarantee of star power and the revenue that comes from them. Second argument, why is this better for smaller artists? And I want to note, this is important because we will flip and explain why this is better for actors, even if side roles, and why it's actually good for them. Three things. First, it's networking, i.e., which is most important, especially in the entertainment industry, for your career growth. It's things like the rare instance that one will actually kickstart their career with a single role. What actors actually need is sustained connection. It's connections with directors, with producers, with even other renowned actors you would otherwise have never gotten in a random indie film with these people never opted into in the first place. It looks like you being sure that Cathy Molina is directing a Catherine Bernardo film and you can get close with her in these projects. And you can continue to ensure a sustainable career and get gigs at the point of which you, even if you are a side character, at the very least you sustain these connections. Secondly, that it's easier to prove yourself in a side role. They explain all of the problems with being a star, right? The immense amount of filming schedules of 24/7, the immense amount of pressure on heavy acting scrutiny, or even things like your talent in the first place, or even with no dedicated fan bases. The support that you oftentimes lack as a new actor is just hard for you to survive in these highly competitive instances. The comparative is, at the very least, we safeguard these people. They are not ready very clearly. There's less amounts of pressure for them. At the very least, what you can believe is that for their mental health and for their own good, it's just best for them. Three, that the box office success translates to their bottom line, i.e., success is important because it massively exponentially increases the amount of money that they get, regardless of if it's a side role or a lead role. But fourthly, that star power doesn't go away even if they aren't chosen for your film. If you, as a movie, don't choose to get this star, they will just go to other films. And so the comparison is not that there's no stars at all, but that you're competing with a smaller amount of firms that are likely going to coalesce more of the views and make it harder for you to compete. What is the weighing of this? In order for you to believe all of the benefits from government, you have to believe the rare chance that movies are hits immediately, that the box office doesn't flop, that investors are completely trusting for the socially diverse movies or the controversial movies that they explain are important. On our side, all you have to believe is that it's sustainable. Very clearly, we're winning this debate. Oppose.
We'd like to thank the Leader of Opposition for their speech. Do not like to call on Deputy Prime Minister. You're visible and audible, but is it okay if you speak louder so that we can hear you better?
Hold on. How about now? Is that okay?
Yeah. That's way better.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can I also just ask if you can hear like things in the background?
No, we can't hear anything from the
Okay.
from-
Because I'm out right now. So if ever the audio gets a bit weird, just let me know. You can just let me know. So to please. Position tries to skew this debate purely on where you're able to keep films alive, where it is more secure and sustainable. But I want to note this is something that will exist on either side. It's just dependent on the debate is then dependent on what this metric actually is. If they want to talk about popularity, then that's particularly how we're able to make it just far more equitable on our side. Why is this true? And I think it's important to note what you get from Cara. Cara tells you that the counterfactual that on our side is that your ability to become popular, your ability to probably get screen time will be based on your talent rather than the nepotism that exists on government side. And that is something that's important and I'll weigh upon later. But firstly, let's talk about what are the bulk of the claim that they try to tell you about. Firstly, they tell you that they're willing to let the secondary leads for like other types of minorities, just allowing the more richer and anybody who has star power to get that main role. But firstly, that is already bad because one, that just perpetuates even further these stereotypes that we told you are harmful and ultimately is unrepresentative of the audiences that they also say is important to get the attraction of. But also, secondly, it's not just generally, this is something that ultimately just oversaturates the media with the same people time and time again. So, sure, maybe you get these same people over and over again, which might give you quote sustainability. But we tell you that ultimately it's putting too many eggs in that same basket, ultimately something that's harmful. But secondly, we see that nepotism just generally and like primarily and principally is bad because if you come to think about it, you are just simply going to be basing the ability for you getting the like people and the actors, all these kinds of artists from this one pool of people based on their ability to be rich, their ability to probably buy their own audiences, which ultimately is not necessarily something anybody and everybody can do. So the popularity they have, sure, it might be on that end, but we tell you it's something that's unjustified because the vast majority of people cannot compete with these kinds of things. And the vast majority of people otherwise could also just perhaps give you even better films if they were able to show that talent and the talent it's in it of itself be the metric as to the way that they're being picked as actors, as artists, etc. And that's the first thing I want to then explain on. What is their entire point on the popularity? They try to tell you they're able to get good movies, but I say that exists on either side. And they say that actually it's far better. Why? It's because on their side, you're going to base a lot of these things on the way that these people look, the way that these people act, the way and the amount of money that they have. When the reality is one, something that's just completely unsustainable because you're going to be getting this from the same people. But also, secondly, it's just if you want to get good movies and you want to have a better quality of that movie, then we say it's far better with the actors who actually have that talent, which is something that will always be skewed on opposition side. Notice is something important because the prioritization of star power will always take away from the audiences as to the way that people are acting, the way that people actually are doing in producing that kind of art. Ultimately, mean to say they aren't actually able to get the good movies anyways. But let's also talk about the process in which this actually happens. And this is where what Cara tells you is quite important. She tries to tell you about how this is just particularly harmful to these kinds of actors, how it's particularly going to look like a long-term harm of them. Example, having to put in lip fillers, probably take part into harmful ways to produce that and internalize that very Western-centric beauty in an Asian market that was not particularly created for them. And notice it's terrible for these people because these are people who will always be subject to these kinds of things, and in turn to the audiences will always perpetuate that same extremely harmful Western beauty standards for all of these people. Note the changes on our side because what then changes or the way that this metric actually works then is on how you're able to create that talent where you're more likely to be able to show how good you are at acting. And I want to note that this is something that is actually quantifiable. It can look like the way that you're able to dance, the way that you're able to conform yourself into an actor or into the character of a movie, which is particularly something that you can quantify based off of like how people like actually enjoy the movie. So ultimately, it's just a far better standard on our side to being able to example, create a movie, maybe be a K-pop idol, etc. But ultimately, it's just far better and sustainable for these actors who ultimately need to keep up these kinds of things on our side. And this is where it's important to note that's going to be on their side where you see these kinds of actors constantly harming themselves. Whereas on our side, we give just a far healthier metric, which is that being of their own talent. Before I go on to the second part, yeah, I'll take a pause.
Even if there is an objective way to measure talent, the problem is that the people deciding what talent is are the same sexist producers you guys claim are so problematic. They're not going to use the best dancer standard. They're going to use the prettiest face standard.
No, but that's the point, right? The whole motion is that we're trying to switch and we're trying to take away from these kinds of star power. So isn't it just far better that we're able to ensure that talent becomes the metric of our side? And I want to add this personally. I think add to this additionally. I think it's also because talent is just far better for these people. And this is particularly where I want to show this is a bargaining chip. I want to note that your ability to capture audiences will probably exist on either side, but the way in which you're going to do that, what's exclusive on our side is that talent is seen as more valuable. Talent is something that people will likely just ultimately want to look at far greater, which that means to say on our side that talent becomes something that will ultimately be practiced upon far better. What this means then is that for the people who ultimately want to go into these kinds of markets or just want to be in these kinds of like scenes, we tell it's just far easier for these people to opt in, which is something that is good because that's how you're able to get representation, which is most important in the media when everything is already so Western centric. I.e., now you get to see that Asian audience with, let's say, probably shorter black hair or someone who is probably a little bit darker skin and not particularly white. I think this is particularly that is good for the especially Asian entertainment industry when everything else is already extremely Western centric. But now, note that talent being the bargaining chip is the tipping point for allowing these things to actually manifest. Why? It's because now the focus is on how you're able to produce these kinds of films or how you're able to get the best types of actors who are able to do that job rather than the people on the top. And I think this is something that will ultimately mean that you already get, from what I said earlier, better films. But also, secondly, that just ultimately the way that people are training for these kinds of things is something that is far more manageable. And I think that's something that will be far better on that level. So what do you actually get on our side? One, I want to know what do you actually get for the audiences. I think it's a kind of solace. It's a kind of ability that you're able to connect to those audiences, which means to say that you are able to gain popularity actually far better on our side when you become relatable to these audiences. But the second point is also that it just becomes far easier for people who want to opt into the market, especially when there is a greater trend for people to want to, example, become artists or example want to become actors. I think it's because of that ultimately it's just far easier for people to get into these kinds of things, which means to say it just becomes far better on our side. But the last thing I want to also talk about then is that it is on our side where we prevent these kinds of elitistic ways as to which we're able to judge people, especially when it comes to beauty standards, which will ultimately become far better on our side. Note that the longer, bigger scale harms that actually accrue on opposition side is just far more people who will likely tie back these beauty standards, ultimately something that's harmful to the vast majority of people. Therefore, you have to propose. Thanks.
I'd like to thank the Deputy Prime Minister for the speech. Now I'd like to call on Deputy Leader of Opposition.
Just POM in chat. Okay, starting in 3, 2, 1. Perhaps Gov could win this debate if talent was truly so inclusive. But again, as you want to note at the start of the debate, we point out that talent is also a black box. It is probably decided by executives that still have beauty standards that are based on the things that they identify to be problematic and is, at minimum, less democratic in nature because these people are probably less the people that we have seen online, seen in spaces that we already know. So the first premise that they have is just straight up false. I will respond to everything else after. Firstly, what is better for actors? Secondly, what is better for the broader industry? The second one we have already clearly won for the lack of engagement from the previous speaker. Firstly, what is better for actors? Gov tries to win this debate for two prongs. One, they say it is unfair because we don't take on actors from diverse backgrounds or appearances. There are two ways in which we deal with this on opposition. I would first flip this. Often the people that they say are diverse in nature, often these casting directors will still be risk averse in casting them towards main characters anyways, which is why the directors that would cast them on their side is a significantly less pool of people. Compare this to our side where there is a significantly bigger pool of people that are willing to cast them as side characters or people within the movie because by nature they aren't the top billing actor, wherein the success of the movie is hinged on their face and their appearance, drawing in audiences, drawing in people to make up the budget of that movie. Which is why the net amount of people that get a wage, that get exposure, that are able to change stereotypes around diverse appearances in that society, and we are able to say that perhaps people like I don't know, and Sneer is actually good, even if he's a provincial individual. That's why we're able to change these things under our side, have more contact with people, because by nature, directors are willing to take this risk because the risk is far less damaging towards themselves and towards the future of all of the people within the production. Two, their analysis defeats their own point. They say, well, there are increasing trends towards accepting diverse individuals. These things would apply on our side, and we're increasingly applying towards lessening the weight of traditional appearance in the basket of what we define as a star. Sure, the info slide says traditional appearances. But for all of the analysis they explain, like social movements, for example, increasing acceptance of the individuals, that's why there are also stars that are rising nowadays that are novel, yes, that are also less traditionally appearing in nature because of the fact that these things and the weight of this within the basket of what we define as a star is lessening. They cannot just say there are no public influencers that are dark skinned. Look at the many, like Catherine Bernardo and Nadine are also Morena actors that have come from posting their clips online and getting popular because of that. Those are the reasons why these people are often increasingly also becoming stars and are getting opportunities. It is not as exclusive as they identify. The second thing they say is talent is fair and inclusive. The first thing I want you to note is just they haven't proven this to be exclusive for government. There are ways in which talent still requires privilege. Why? One, your accent for you to be seen to be a talented individual still has to conform to general standards of what is palatable for these movies, which often still excludes a large proportion of individuals. Two, for you to be talented, you probably have to practice a lot, which requires you to have a lot of projects before that point or have attended a talent school to begin with. Three, this is the worst one. It is a black box anyways. Executives often still will determine these things in small spaces, talking to each other about subjective metrics of what talent is with their own standards and biases applied. Compare this to our side where, and the second reason for why this is diminished on their side, star power, part of the basket of what defines star power is increasingly more influencers, increasingly more people who are able to market themselves with charisma, which as you note, perhaps there is some component of what other stars are based on their appearance. Also, increasingly, a lot of stars are also getting to become stars less reliant on that appearance, more able to say they are stars because they're charismatic, they're stars because they market themselves online, influencers and all that, which is far more of a democratically agreed upon way in which these people are popular or meritocratic or to be seen as celebrated in society as actors than theirs. What this determines to you at the end of this debate is Gov's entire intuition pump of emotionally appealing to you that these people will never get the chance in this limelight dies. One, if the movie isn't greenlit, the diverse actor would not have the chance to be in that movie anyways. Our side of the house has at minimum these people be put as side actors, which we explain they graduate towards being bigger talent later on if they are qualified and if people like them. And also this breaks the contact theory thing because now people are more exposed to these individuals of different appearances such that they become later on the stars themselves. Two, we also explain why we have more democratic processes as well. Even if there is some unfairness on our side, this is not an exclusive point under government, which is why this entire appearance clash is out. Secondly then, what is better for the industry? Gov immediately loses here. Why? They say, well, it's relatable and well, it is new. Relatable is not the same thing under our side. It's far more relatable under our side for the actors that we cast versus theirs. Before I explain that, POI real quickly.
So the problem here is that a lot of how you perceive, i.e., the black box, preferring a pretty face, sounds a lot like preferring star power and the capacity to be popular in the future. Can't you at least give us the fiat that we're owed and assume in the case that this is based on talent?
It's not my fault that you guys don't have a clear explanation of what talent is at the start of your case. It is more likely than not that star power per the info slide is a diversity of different things that people have identified and have felt in their hearts versus yours where it's likely the selection process is smaller, which is why it's not as all-inclusive as you explained. Secondly then, why is there more success on the R side? Most of these countries in Asian countries are based on personalities and they care a lot about personalities. Love teams in the Philippines, they often have to care a lot about these things to attend the movies. Why? One, you don't want to attend a bad movie, so you're more likely to attend a movie where you know that actor, you've seen that movie before, thus the risk on your uncertainty is less. Two, you're more likely to attend these movies because now you have other people to attend them with because you're not just attending a niche actor that no one has ever seen. Three, you're more likely to attend the movies under our side because you know that these people are also probably backed by all of the networks that they have, directors that they know, the people within cinematographers that they know, which is why the movies that they're likely to generate are quite quality. But fourth, these people end up rising to the top in the sea of many influencers. And as much as Gov wants to put this down, because they are good, because they are talented, because in fact they have deserved these things. And perhaps some people haven't, but a lot of the people who are the top billing in many Asian countries, like in Korea, like in the Philippines, are genuinely good, which is why they often get awards in other places. This feeds actors, this feeds cinematographers, this feeds people on the ground. This is what gets success, and their side dies in anonymity even if they cast the most diverse faces.
I'd like to thank the DLO for this speech. Would not like to call on government creator.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, audible in this.
You guys do chat. There are a few absurd things I want to take out at the start of the speech. The first thing they say is that socially important films won't be popular. The first thing I'll ask is that talent in acting and singing similarly creates virality in the same way that many other things do, which allows for the sort of reach they'd want for socially important movies in the first place. Second, we're willing to trade this off because Hello, Love, Goodbye was not the fucking tipping point for OFW rights. Like, this is a ridiculous argument. The second thing I want to note is what is the burden on OP? Because they keep on crossing the house here. They say that star power connotes some amount of talent. I can similarly say the opposite, right? Sometimes all talented people need are a platform. Barry Keoghan, for example, wasn't given all of these opportunities prior to Banshees of Inisherin where he was able to showcase his talent. If anything, I'd actually say that star power does not always equivocate the talent because of A, an opportunity cost, i.e. you have to develop one or the other and you only have a limited amount of time. But second, they don't need to be talented since the vast majority of their income streams come from the individuals who were giving them money to their follower base. And so there are massive incentives for talented individuals to eventually develop star power in the future, but very little for people who are currently famous already to develop that talent, which makes the stuff on their side stale and boring. So if they want to talk about the entertainment that exists, that's far worse under their side. The second thing they say is that, well, they could be side characters. This also doesn't change on our side. If people become willing to hire side characters on their side as part of minority groups, that presumably doesn't change on our comparative too. But secondly, this ignores the nuance and the importance of main characters. That when individuals watch movies, the people that stick with them are not individuals who appear on the screen for 30 minutes, but the person who's constantly seen. And that sort of representation, as we explained down the bench, is important writ large. Lastly, we actually do give a definition of talent. It's the ability for you to be able to woo audiences based on the things that you're able to do. It's skill, it's acting skill, the way in which you're able to convey emotions based on how you look. It's how good you are at dancing and how well you're able to fit within the forms of what we've already explained. These are all very reasonable interpretations of talent. And note how they flimsily say that talent is still going to be based on how you look as a person, when that is divorced from the notion and the fiat that we are given, as opposed to their side where they have to rely on these things as a basis and the black box that they say. So they can't just say, well, individuals, these things won't be liberalized and therefore this thing will remain the same. You have to allow for some living and breathing space for this debate to work out in order for a debate to happen in the first place. First, I want to talk about the success of the Asian entertainment industry because they say that this is the most important consideration. And here, you know what? I'll bite. Perhaps this is. But get better success on our side. Because what they say is that, well, star power is what allows for all of these sorts of things to happen. It's what convinces people to watch movies in the first place, and therefore, perhaps you're able to grow the market through these means. The first thing that I'd want to note is that star power also connotates that you have to pay these individuals more. And note that, especially film sets in lesser developed nations like the Philippines have a more limited budget, means that a larger amount of the money goes disproportionately to the star actors instead of the individuals who are working outside of the movie. So you are paying editors less and you are paying cinematographers less because it means that the star power demands more of that money from you. And they can't just say that people demand and volunteer to be paid less because they want to work with these star individuals. Obviously, these are also people that have to eat. And note, these aren't the most important people on the scale of money insofar as you explained, the individuals who gravitate towards this profession in the first place are already rich individuals. But second, I'd point out poor studios benefit from a culture of hiring on the basis of talent rather than hiring on the basis of star power. And the reason why is because what universities and what entertainment industries choose to do also affects the sort of content that individuals individuals consume. And what happens under their side is that they create a premium specifically on individuals who have star power in the first place, which are already inaccessible to the vast majority of poor studios who would be willing to hire individuals outside of that market, but very, very easy to hire individuals with talent and make that become an actual socially valid thing in our comparative, which means that the movies that are created by significantly smaller movie houses and producers have far more traction on the basis that people do not implicitly judge on the basis of star power, but largely on the basis of talent. This is what larger movies do as well. But secondly, I'd point out that success for the Asian entertainment industry does not exist under their side. And the reason why is because a lot of the film as it exists in, for example, the United States or Western cinema has an express emphasis on talent as opposed to star power, which is why you see a lot of them taking more risks on individuals who perhaps did not have that star power in the first place and less on individuals recurring, which is why studios are becoming more and more hesitant to hire Timothy Chalamet. And what we'd explain is that it's specifically the fact that people who are already rich, engage in star power in the first place, have no incentive to work hard, have shitty roles and shitty performances in movies, that the Asian entertainment industry stagnates to a far greater extent because people become lazy on their comparative. But let's buy. Perhaps the star power on their side does liberalize. I want to note firstly that this is a retrospective motion. Empirically, this has not been the truth for the 50 years in the prior to the 20 years that have already happened, where a lot of these beauty standards were hedged on Western audiences and Western beauty standards, which disproportionately affected how individuals, especially who were dark-skinned, were affected and hired within these movie studios in the first place. Before I go on, I'll take a POI if you guys have any.
So it's about the size of the industry. No matter how many small, talented indie films are created, it's the fact that when a larger film is created, many more talented filmographers, technicians, cinematographers are created, perhaps from diverse backgrounds, but much more people are fed and are created jobs on our side.
So this is uncomparative. The first thing that we explain is a limelight and a pipeline as to how people who are talented are able to be viral and to be people that want to be watched by the general media in the first place. That creates the big movie industry on your side. In fact, we explained that the prerequisite for all of these things is ensuring that it's entertaining in the first place. You don't get that on your comparative. So I agree with Jello, right? Perhaps no matter which way we slice the cake, the individuals who will fall into these positions are likely going to be rich, not discriminated on the basis of money, insofar as for this to happen in the first place, you'd presumably need a similar background in terms of paying for acting school, paying for vocal lessons, in the same way you'd have to pay for social media accounts and that sort of virality. So all we have to do is weigh off why we'd rather have people work hard by developing their talent as opposed to developing the things on their side. The first thing I'd note is that it is destructive to try and benefit and force your way into star power. That means selling yourself on social media, having to bank on things like sexuality and your own things as a woman, for example, having to do a whole sorts of things like whiten your skin on the basis, which are far, far worse alternatives than just spending more hours at the studio, because those things could at least be better for you. So even in a consideration of what is better for the average person, you still have to side with government on this side. For all of these reasons, very, very proud to propose.
I'd like to thank the government for their speech. We now like to call an opposition bill.
Hello, Nelly. You can also call me Wonkar Y if you want. I will take POIs however you want to give them. Every film that's ever been made is a multi-million-dollar gambit. To make a film that even stands a chance at the box office, you need studios to pre-commit to millions in wages, casting budgets, and cinematography fees before a single line has ever been recorded. Star power isn't just a tool by nepotistic producers, it's a vital aspect that they need to get films off the ground in the first place. This is the reality of the film industry, and it's not going to change because of some preconceived standard of talent that government themselves cannot define. 3 things in the speech. The first question I want to ask is whether there is an objective standard of talent and why there isn't, and why other default heuristics will be used instead. The push from proposition is to assert that the dominance of star power has entrenched harmful beauty standards and nepotistic treatment. The problem is at no point do they explain why shifting to a talent-based standard changes any of those things. There are 3 responses we point out down the bench. The first is to note the gaping hole where government's counterfactual should be. Talent is not a fair and objective basis. 1, because talent is bought through things like training, rich rich talent schools, selective like K-pop academies that you have to be rich to get into the first place. And in many instances, talent is directly linked to the quote-unquote harmful and arbitrary standards that they themselves challenge. How do you say that an actor is talented? It's because they're expressive. It's because they deliver the lines in a right way. All of these things are based factors that are likely to be judged according to preconceived beauty standards. What we're saying is the actor sounds white. What we're saying is the actor has a pretty face. We're just couching it in the language of artistic talent to make it sound like we aren't being racist when really the same standards still apply. Secondly, even if you believe there is an extent to which talent is objective, the problem is that the people who are determining what talent are the same industry producers they claim are so evil. We explain that these people are by nature risk averse. So in the absence of the ability to rely on star power as a heuristic, they're going to rely on default heuristics that are even more harmful. It's when you don't have a star who's a morena, or you don't have a star who doesn't fit the conventional beauty standards of that nation, that filmographers are going to say, well, let's just go with the prettiest face. Well, let's just go to with the most mass appealing actress, because I think that's what's going to sell at the box office. Take note, it wasn't enough for Gov to prove that talent can be objectively measured. What they had to prove was that it would be the consistent objective measurement of talent across the years down the industry. They consider the comparative. And why is it that star power is actually more democratic than any basis of talent they suggest? One, Jello explains to no response that star power has actually grown far more democratic over the years because there's a greater extent to which audiences now interact with studios and can demand representation in certain films. People like Zendaya, for instance, probably wouldn't have had the star power they have now if we didn't exist in the current environment we do, where audiences have a very direct feedback loop to studios and producers. All of these things suggest that there isn't really a representation problem with star power. Secondly, as I point out in the POI all the way from first, star power actually gives studios the justification to hire more diverse talents. It's because this person is so recognizable, because this person already has their own fan base, that I'm willing to take the risk and give them an $8 million casting budget, give them the wage they deserve, because I don't think it's going to harm the profitability of my film. But take note, this goes one level further. It's also when you hire high star power individuals from minority backgrounds that these people are able to call out racism in the film industry. It's once you have someone in the industry itself that they're able to call out the pernicious practice that government identifies, which they're only able to do if they're already stars to begin with. When calling out the bad parts of the industry won't harm their career because they're already assured a base of popularity. How do you weigh this issue at the end? It's far more likely that one person from a minority background, one unconventional beauty, will amass the star power necessary to rise the ranks of the film industry than many hundreds or dozens of unknown morenas, unknown people who don't fit conventional beauty standards, will all have box office hits on government side. In Gov's best case, perhaps one or two of them get breakthrough roles, but the other 98% of actors they cast now have films that flopped at the box office and will never be cast again. Take note, the pernicious effect of hiring an actor from a minority background and then that person having a bad film doesn't just affect that actor. It trickles into everyone from that background. It makes directors from everywhere more reluctant to hire those types of people because they feel like it's a guaranteed recipe for failure. Secondly, let's talk about safeguarding the integrity of the film industry. Let's be charitable and assume there is an objective standard of talent on Gov. The problem is they don't engage with the biggest part of our case. We explained clearly from then that star power plays a central role in securing investor confidence from the studio, securing the best network of talents, and getting more funding in the long run that allows cinemas to invest in more experimental projects. The responses we hear from Sam are twofold. The first thing he says is that stars drain your resources because you have to pay them more. Irrelevant, there's a bigger pool of resources to begin with, so the budget is bigger, so they're not eating into your budget. The second thing Sam says is, what about the poor studios who can't hire stars? They're also irrelevant to this debate because they couldn't hire stars on either side of the house. They're not making the same types of films. What we have at the end of this is, if you believe what matters for more representation in the film industry is simply getting more films produced, that's only possible if studios are consistently making profitable films and aren't constantly risking their bottom lines every time they put out a film. If you know you have a winning film at MMFF already, that's when you're willing to take the risk with a more indie hit. I'll take the POI.
So studios will ignore talent and just choose the most mass appealing people, as you say. Then isn't there no change at all, since these individuals would presumably also fulfill all of the industry standards required to get that funding?
No, the margin is publicity. On our side, you're choosing mass appealing people who the public recognizes and have been there for a reason. It's experience. On your side, they're choosing mass appealing people who nobody knows and the directors think are talented for whatever reason that they aren't accountable to the public for. Star Pounder is a form of public accountability. You're famous because people like you and people think you're talented, not because some director likes you and thinks you're talented. Finally, very quickly, why are small actors better off on our side? We give you 3 reasons that get no response from them. 1, your success in the entertainment industry depends on your network, not one-hit wonders. It's more important that you feature in a string of films where you can meet big names in the industry. You can meet Kathy Modina, you can meet Wong Kar-wai, you can meet Bong Joon-ho, and you have the guaranteed income of being able to feature in multiple films rather than just one-hit wonder. Second, it's ensuring a paycheck. If a box office movie flops on their side, you get 0 profits, your career is dead. Making any amount of money is better, especially if you're a small-time star who isn't famous yet. But thirdly, it's the pressure of a leading role. If you aren't star power, you're going to be compared to star power, which is why even if you're talented, you're always going to look like a loser. For those reasons, oppose.
Like to thank the opposition lead for their speech. We would now like to call on opposition reply.
Am I audible?
Yes, audible and visible.
Okay. Sorry, I think my mom's listening to music. Can you hear that? Can you hear the background noise?
No, we can't.
Okay, cool. Okay. I'll start my speech in 3, 2. The film industry, just like any industry, is based on economics. Whether or not I'm guaranteed a return on my investment, whether or not I'm guaranteed my film will be successful. And it's the same for any means of entertainment, whether that's K-pop, whether that's films, whether that's music. 2 issues I want to resolve. Firstly, how do we actually help actors? The first claim that comes from government side is that star power is too arbitrary. Talent is more fair and an inclusive metric. The first question we ask is why? Talent, as explained, is just as privileged. It is acting school, it is dance workshops, it is all of these things you need to invest significant amounts of money in. That meant that you are also guaranteed that it's the same amount of people that are always going to get these top roles. In fact, when you can, assuming the absolute best case like what Sam wants, base these decisions completely and solely on talent, it skews more to the same elite and privileged people that they dislike and becomes more expensive for the average person that couldn't possibly afford that risk, that couldn't possibly afford these schools. Secondly, it's a question of what happens next. At best, let's say you believe the debate didn't happen. They base off only talent. We use a mix of things that define star power. Society is more liberal in time. Presumably, this means that diversity is fairly the same, that access is more or less equal. But what does change? We explained to you that what changes and what is actually impactful is the way the film industry develops. It's the gambit of people latching on to talent to outcompete other films that mean you are on net less funded. And that's true, right? If it's completely based on talent, when they're constantly shifting around based on arbitrary standards for what actually decides a good dancer, a good filmmaker, a good actor, all of these things are far harder for you to navigate, but also far harder for actual investors to believe and see the truth in. Versus our comparative, where it's far easier for you to, at the very least, maybe they're not the most talented, maybe they're not the best people for this role, at the very least guarantee a large amount of people to support these things, which is why you get the investment and funding, which we explain is important in widening access to the industry and getting your foot in the door. The next thing they say is, well, we can grow these things too and get a following. The first response to this is, I'm sure you can in the same world, in some world, but it's not 100% certain. And in that uncertainty, how do you continue to assume a base of popularity? This is particularly important because bad films ruin the industry trust into these talents, into these directors. And the intuition for this is clear. They want things like more liberalism. They want things like changes in the patriarchy and the corrupt system of nepotism. You only get these things when you get groundbreakers, when you get support for smaller niche indie projects that could only possibly have been funded with the power of star power and the gamble the studios are willing to take because they have the extra revenue from these things. I.e., if a piece on the queer experience in the Philippines flop, that is less trust not just on the director, but also on the concept and any succeeding directors who possibly wanted to make that same type of film. On net, what this means is more inertia in doing things like breaking socially controversial norms. So even if you believe that movies are equally successful on their side, the comparative is that movies are less socially controversial. They don't change the way society thinks about these things. And if you believe it's retrospective, where things like misogyny and things like patriarchy were so much worse back then, what you do is expand these things to infinitum and make it difficult for you to actually change the insane industry that they want to be able to change. The second is where we actually expand options and give them sustainable things, even despite secondary roles. We explain to you that obviously, even if you are talented, you're not always guaranteed that you're going to get the best box office. At the very least, what we explain to you is that even if you don't get these lead roles, you're able to do things like ensure connections. You're able to do things like ensure support and growth. At the very least, at bare minimum, ensure that the film itself is successful, survive on your career, but also increase your wages, which I want to note is particularly important, especially for the same people that they explain couldn't possibly get these lead roles because of other external reasons like racism, like misogyny. What we explain is why we give these people the option, give them a chance in the future, and give them upliftment and great exits. All of these reasons, post.
Like you think the opposition reply for the speech, we would not like to call on government reply.
Hi, am I visible and audible?
Yes, you are visible and audible.
I want to talk about two things. The first thing they think they win on is that studios, they're not allowed to go broke, guys. The first response that we launched down the bench is that they killed their case by running two different attacks on the idea of talent. So, if talent is basically the same thing that allows nepotism, that allows beauty standards, then the same kinds of actors would have still been elected, would have still been in those main character roles on either side. So I don't see the whole dilemma between people not wanting to go out and watch these films any longer. The only thing that they say to make sure that they save the case is that the difference is this is a publicly established person versus an unknown person with talent. So that concede that talent is real. There is an objective way of being able to find some sort of talent, even if they are not public in that way. So it's either that they give up part of their case and they give up the main contingent thing that they win on, that studios go broke, or that they explain that talent isn't real and they don't get the harms of our side. The second thing that we respond to this is this is just not important, right? Studios, who does this actually benefit? They talk about the artists that need to be saved, need to be given their wages, but it's again those same kinds of artists that they explain already come from rich backgrounds, already have these amounts of privileges, and they try to say that, oh, at least we give the side character roles to people who are minorities. But again, they don't explain why this is symmetric, or why this is exclusive to their side. Presumably, if it's so exclusive, presumably this will also exist on our side, that you still give them side character roles either way. The last thing that we contend with is explaining that this does not create social progress in the way that they want to explain. If you listen to their case, we want to make sure that these studios survive by making sure they get publicity, everyone watches, and investors are confident because they're based on societal standards that have already been proven to be true. Exactly. That's why you don't invest in indie films. That's why you don't invest in anything else, because you have to continue on with that same norm of being able to uphold social standards. We already flipped this by explaining that talent is a more persuasive way and a more accommodating way to accommodate progress. Because if you take someone who is virtually unknown but good, that is where you get more virality. Because you don't get the kind of stagnation that happens on their side, where good actors with publicity, with actors with publicity have no incentive to want to get better because they're hired for the very fact that they are just popular on social media. There's no incentive to expand their talent versus people who get more and more talented and want to expand that star power base. And secondly, they already you concede that this enforces standards onto people because they have to rely on the people who are already popular. They're popular because they enforce social norms like beauty standards, and that is getting unpopular, and that is getting movements rallying up against them. They get stuck in that reality. I want to talk about what we push on our side, and that is the treatment of artists. And this is not a symmetric claim that they can just wash off very easily, because we explain what talent is and why that is a fairer and more accessible metric. One, it is something that you can actually assess rather than just something you can assign and fudge up by numbers, by allowing something to cause someone to connect to them on social media, or faking social media followers, or just a thinner body ideals. What happens on our side is talent is not just something that you can guess out of nowhere. Like, if someone can hit that high C, if someone can do the split, if someone can do the pirouette good, that is things that are objective metrics that you can do. And that is clear because you obviously don't have star power classes, but you do have dancing classes. You do have Juilliard and these kinds of things. But secondly, it is the deal breaker comes then into where you can assign talent. And they say that it is CEOs who will always be hammering down and telling you that you don't have talent because of those social norms that they'll still continue to embed. But what changes, and what we explain changes, it's the pressure that you put onto yourself as you're training. And we explain this from PM. It's the progress that you're making while you're training to become a better artist. It's the fact that you're not punishing yourself for not looking a certain way. It's that you can focus on dancing. You know, I know there's a lot of star power on the side of opposition, but there's a fair amount of talent on.
Thank you, government reply. Thank you, debaters. And that ends open quarterfinals for this round. You may virtually cross the house. And everyone except the judges, please leave the room. We'll be announcing the results shortly in the main room. Thank you.